The stars stretched endlessly across the viewport of asteroid station Omega-7, but nobody inside the cramped conference room cared about the beauty of space anymore. Ambassador Zixra slammed her webbed hand against the metal table, her blue skin darkening with frustration. The Crithian Empire had won again, and this time there would be no recovery. The Battle of Helios Prime had cost them everything: ships, soldiers, hope. Around the table sat representatives from a dozen different species, all members of the Resistance Coalition, all wearing the same expression of defeat. Commander Jake Morrison stood in the shadows of the Valiant's bridge, 3 light years away from that desperate meeting. He was 38 years old, tall and lean with dark hair starting to gray at the temples. His brown eyes studied the tactical display showing Crithian fleet movements throughout the sector. They were preparing something big, probably the final push to eliminate all resistance. He had seen this pattern before during the Outer Rim Wars, back when humanity was still learning its place among the stars. Lieutenant Sophie Blake approached from the weapons station, her blonde hair tied back in a regulation ponytail. She was 28 and brilliant, the kind of officer who could calculate firing solutions in her head faster than most computers. Her green eyes scanned the same display Morrison watched, and she did not like what she saw. 50 Crithian warships gathering at their fortress world, 3 dreadnoughts among them. That kind of force could crush the entire coalition in hours. Morrison turned to his communications officer. The young man looked up from his console, waiting for orders. Morrison told him to scan for distress signals in the nearby sectors, anything that might indicate where the Crithians planned to strike first. The officer nodded and adjusted his equipment, his fingers flying over the controls. Within minutes, he had something. A weak signal from Omega-7, encoded with old Coalition protocols. They were calling for help, but they probably did not expect anyone to answer. Back at Omega-7, Ambassador Zixra listened to another round of arguments about surrender versus suicide. A reptilian delegate from the Sauron Collective hissed that fighting was pointless, that they should negotiate terms before the Crithians decided to make examples of their worlds. An insectoid representative from the hive clusters clicked its mandibles in agreement, its compound eyes reflecting the dim lights of the conference room. Only a few voices still spoke of resistance, but even they sounded hollow and tired. The discussion stopped when alarms shrieked through the station. Someone had entered the sector, and their signature did not match any known vessel in Coalition or Crithian databases. The delegates rushed to the observation deck, pressing against the reinforced windows to see what approached. At first they saw nothing but stars. Then space itself seemed to ripple and tear, a phenomenon they recognized as a quantum slipstream exit. Whatever ship used that technology was far more advanced than anything they possessed. The Valiant emerged from the quantum tunnel like a predator stepping into light. The battleship measured over 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull a dark gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon ports lined its flanks, currently closed but clearly numerous. The ship's design spoke of purpose and power, every line built for combat efficiency. But what shocked the Coalition observers most was the symbol painted on its side, a blue and white flag with stars and stripes, the banner of humanity. Zixra felt her heart skip a beat. Humans. Nobody had seen a human ship in this sector for over 200 years. After first contact with the galactic community, humanity had retreated to their own systems, disappointed by the politics and constant warfare they found among the stars. The few records that existed described them as technologically backward, struggling to match even basic galactic standards. Their ships had been slow, their weapons primitive, their shields barely functional, yet this vessel before her looked nothing like those old descriptions. Morrison opened a communication channel to the station, his voice calm and measured. He identified himself as Commander Jake Morrison of the human battleship Valiant, and he understood they had a Crithian problem. He had been monitoring their sector for the past 3 days and noticed the military buildup. If they wanted help, humanity was offering. The silence that followed his transmission lasted almost a full minute. The Coalition delegates looked at each other, unsure how to respond. 300 light-years away on the fortress world of Krytos Prime, Admiral Velthor received the first reports of the human intruder. He sat in his command chair, a massive seat designed for his 7-foot frame and broad shoulders. His gray skin bore the scars of decades of warfare, and his yellow eyes held no warmth or mercy. He reviewed the data his scouts transmitted. noting the human ship's size and unknown configuration. A smile crossed his face, revealing sharp teeth. Humans. He remembered the old reports, remembered how easily they had been intimidated during first contact. They were weak, cautious, unwilling to fight. One human ship meant nothing. Velthor ordered a patrol squadron to investigate and destroy the intruder if they refused to leave. 12 warships, more than enough to handle any lone vessel. His subordinate officers acknowledged the command and began coordinating the attack force. The admiral returned his attention to planning the final assault on the coalition bases. The humans would be a footnote, dealt with quickly and forgotten just as fast. Back at Omega 7, the coalition leadership debated Morrison's offer. Some argued they should accept any help available, even from species they barely knew. Others worried this might provoke the Crithians further, turning a manageable defeat into total annihilation. Zixra listened to both sides, her diplomatic training keeping her expression neutral even as her mind raced through possibilities. Finally, she made the decision. They had nothing left to lose. She opened a return channel to the Valiant and requested permission to board for discussions. Morrison granted the request immediately and provided docking coordinates. His ship maneuvered closer to the station, its movements precise despite its enormous size. The coalition observers noted how smoothly it handled, how responsive it seemed. Their own ships were sluggish by comparison, requiring careful planning for even basic maneuvers. This human vessel moved like a fighter craft, despite being larger than their biggest dreadnoughts. On the Valiant's bridge, Blake ran final diagnostics on all weapon systems. Morrison had ordered a full combat readiness check, which meant he expected trouble soon. She worked through each system methodically, railguns charged and ready, particle beam emitters calibrated, point defense turrets online, missile tubes loaded. Everything showed green. She reported status to Morrison, who nodded but kept his eyes on the tactical display. The Crithian patrol squadron had launched and would arrive within the hour. Morrison told his crew to maintain minimal power signatures, to let the Crithians think they were dealing with a weak target. Blake understood the strategy but did not like it. Letting the enemy shoot first always felt wrong, even when the plan called for it. Morrison caught her expression and smiled slightly. He told her to trust him, that the Crithians needed to see what humanity had become, and sometimes the best lessons came from direct demonstration. The Crithian patrol squadron dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 12 warships arranged in a standard attack pattern that had served the Empire well for 3 centuries. Each vessel measured roughly 800 meters long, bristling with plasma cannons and missile launchers. Their hulls bore the crimson and gold colors of the Crithian military, symbols of power that made most species surrender without firing a shot. Squadron Commander Thorkin sat in his command chair and studied the human ship on his display, noting its size with slight surprise, but not concern. Bigger targets were easier to hit. Ambassador Zixra and 5 other coalition delegates stood in the Valiant's docking bay, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. The interior of the human ship gleamed with clean metal and bright lighting, far different from the cramped and aging vessels they commanded. Crew members moved with purpose and precision, their blue and gray uniforms crisp and professional. A young ensign approached and guided the visitors toward the conference room, his manner polite but efficient. Everything about the ship spoke of discipline and capability. Thorkin opened a communication channel to the human vessel, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been seriously challenged. He demanded the human ship identify itself properly and depart the sector immediately, stating that this area fell under Crithian jurisdiction and unauthorized vessels would be destroyed. He expected immediate compliance or at least fearful negotiation. What he got instead was a calm human voice explaining they were simply travelers offering assistance to those in need, with no intention of interfering with legitimate Crithian interests. Morrison stood in the conference room with the coalition delegates, his tactical officer feeding him updates through a discreet earpiece. The Crithian squadron had arrived and made their demands. He excused himself briefly from his guests and returned to the bridge, Blake following close behind. The crew was already at battle stations waiting for his orders. He took his command chair and opened the channel to respond to Thorkin, his tone remaining friendly but firm. The Valiant would not be leaving, but they had no desire for conflict. Perhaps the Crithians should reconsider their approach. Thorkin felt his temper rise at the humans' casual dismissal of his authority. He had destroyed resistance ships for less insolence. He terminated the communication and ordered his weapons officer to fire a warning shot across the human vessel's bow, close enough to make them understand this was not a negotiation. The plasma bolt streaked through space, a brilliant orange line of superheated energy that would have vaporized most fighters. It passed within 50 meters of the Valiant's hull, exactly as targeted. Impressive shooting, but wasted on a target about to become debris. Morrison ordered shields raised. Flake activated the defensive systems, and every coalition observer watching from Omega-7 saw something that made them question their sensors. Energy barriers flared to life around the Valiant, a shimmering field of force that registered power levels far beyond anything in their databases. The numbers made no sense. Shields that strong should require a ship 3 times that size just to house the generators. Yet there they were, stable and holding at full strength. Thorkin reviewed his own sensor data and felt the first whisper of doubt. Those shield readings could not be accurate. He ordered his squadron to fire a full volley, targeting the human ship's engines. If their shields were truly that powerful, the volley would test them properly. If not, the human vessel would be crippled and ready for capture. 12 ships fired simultaneously, over 200 plasma bolts converging on a single target. The barrage lit up space like a miniature sun. The plasma impacts hit the Valiant's shields and dissipated like rain on stone. Every bolt absorbed, every joule of energy converted and bled away through the shield matrix. Blake checked her displays and reported 0 damage, not even a fluctuation in shield strength. The defensive systems had handled the attack without stress. She looked at Morrison and requested permission to return fire. He granted it but gave her strict parameters. Disable only, no kills, surgical strikes on propulsion systems. He wanted these Crithians to go home and tell their admiral exactly what happened here. The weapon ports along the Valiant's hull opened, revealing arrays of railguns that looked nothing like the energy weapons common throughout the galaxy. Blake's targeting systems locked onto all 12 Crithian ships simultaneously, her computers calculating firing solutions faster than any organic mind could follow. She initiated the attack sequence, and the railgun spoke with thunder that could not be heard in the vacuum of space, but registered on every sensor in the sector. Solid projectiles accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, tore through space and found their targets with perfect precision. Each round had been calculated to hit specific points on Crithian ship hulls, penetrating armor and destroying propulsion systems without touching crew quarters or life support. In 30 seconds, all 12 warships lost their main engines. Secondary explosions rippled through their engineering sections as power systems overloaded. Not a single Crithian died, but every ship was dead in space, drifting and helpless. Thorkin stared at his status displays in disbelief. His entire squadron disabled in half a minute by a single enemy vessel using weapons technology he did not recognize. His tactical officer reported casualties. 0 dead, 15 injured from falling when the ship lost power. All injuries minor. The human had destroyed their ability to fight without killing anyone. That level of precision should have been impossible, yet his crippled ship proved otherwise. Morrison opened a channel to all 12 disabled Crithian vessels, his voice carrying across space to reach hundreds of shocked enemy crew members. He informed them they were free to make repairs and retreat once their systems were functional again, but they should carry a message to Admiral Velthor. Tell him humanity had returned to galactic space and things had changed during their absence. Tell him the era of Crithian dominance through military force was over. Tell him that if he wanted war, humanity would oblige. But it would not go the way he expected. Zixra watched the entire engagement from the Valiant's conference room, her scaled hands gripping the edge of a table as her mind struggled to process what she witnessed. A single human ship had just defeated a Crithian squadron without taking damage and without killing anyone. The tactical precision required for such an attack exceeded anything the coalition thought possible. She turned to her fellow delegates and saw her own shock reflected in their faces. Every species represented in this room had lost battles to the Crithians, had watched their ships burn and their people die. Now these humans appeared and made Crithian warships look like toys. Morrison returned to the conference room and apologized for the interruption. He gestured for the delegates to sit and began explaining humanity's situation. 200 years ago, His people had made first contact with the galactic community and found themselves hopelessly outmatched technologically. Rather than accept permanent inferiority, humanity withdrew and dedicated those 2 centuries to advancement. They built new ships, developed new weapons, created defensive systems that could withstand anything they might face. But they did not do this for conquest or empire. They did it so no one could ever force humanity to accept terms they found unacceptable. Zixra found her voice and asked the question every delegate wanted answered. If humanity possessed such power, why return now? Why involve themselves in someone else's war against the Crithian Empire? Morrison's answer was simple and direct. Because the Crithians represented exactly the kind of tyranny humanity refused to tolerate anywhere. Because the coalition species deserved the same freedom humanity claimed for itself. Because sometimes those with power had a responsibility to help those without it. He offered a formal alliance, human military support in exchange for trade agreements and mutual defense treaties. Admiral Velthor crushed the datapad in his massive hand, the metal casing cracking under pressure from his rage. Thorkin's report sat before him on his desk, along with sensor logs that confirmed every humiliating detail. 12 warships disabled in 30 seconds by primitive humans who should have been crawling in technological infancy. His yellow eyes burned as he read the tactical analysis again, searching for some explanation that did not involve accepting that humans had surpassed Crithian military science. The explanation refused to appear. Commander Morrison walked through the corridors of Omega-7 Station with Ambassador Zixra, discussing the practical details of their new alliance. Coalition engineers followed them, their devices recording every word and measurement as they tried to understand how human technology worked. Morrison explained that humanity could not simply give away their shield designs or weapon systems, not yet, but they could provide tactical training and coordinate defensive strategies. The coalition would learn to fight smarter, to use what they had more effectively, while humanity provided the heavy firepower when needed. Blake supervised weapons drills on the Valiant, running her crew through simulation after simulation. She knew combat readiness would determine whether they survived what came next. The Crithians would not accept their defeat quietly, and Admiral Velthor had a reputation for overwhelming responses to any challenge. She estimated they had perhaps a week before the Empire assembled a counter-strike force, maybe less if Velthor let his pride override his strategic sense. She reported her assessment to Morrison, who agreed completely and began preparing accordingly. On Krytos Prime, Velthor convened his senior commanders in the war room, a vast chamber dominated by a holographic display of the sector. 50 admirals and generals stood at attention while he outlined his plan. The largest fleet mobilization in decades, concentrated firepower that would vaporize the human ship and everything around it. 3 dreadnoughts would form the core of the attack, the Destroyer, the Conqueror, and his own flagship, the Inevitable. Each dreadnought carried Nova cannons, experimental weapons that could crack planetary shields. Against a single ship, even one with impressive defenses, they would be unstoppable. Morrison received intelligence reports from coalition scouts who had been monitoring Crithian fleet movements. The numbers kept growing, 30 warships, then 40, then 50. 3 dreadnoughts confirmed. He studied the data and made his decision. The Valiant alone could probably handle that force, but probably was not good enough when lives depended on the outcome. He sent 2 coded transmissions using quantum communication channels that reached across light years instantly. The responses came within hours. Help was coming. Zixra stood in the Omega-7 command center and watched 2 new contacts appear on long-range sensors. They emerged from quantum slipstreams just like the Valiant had, their signatures matching human vessel profiles. Her species had 3 hearts, and she felt all of them beat faster as she realized what this meant. The humans had not sent their only battleship. They had sent a fleet. The new arrivals moved into formation with the Valiant. 3 massive warships that represented more firepower than the Coalition had ever possessed. Captain Greg Murphy commanded the Defiant, a battleship identical in design to Morrison's vessel, but with subtle modifications that made it excel at long-range engagements. Murphy was 42, a veteran of the same Outer Rim wars that had shaped Morrison's tactical thinking. He opened a channel to his old friend and promised that wherever Morrison led, the Defiant would follow. His crew was ready, his weapons were charged, and he personally wanted to see how the Crithians handled fighting someone who could shoot back effectively. Captain Lisa Carter brought the Intrepid into position, completing the defensive triangle around Omega-7. Her ship specialized in close combat and electronic warfare, systems designed to blind enemy sensors while delivering devastating strikes at point-blank range. Carter was 35 and brilliant, having designed half the electronic countermeasures that protected human fleets. She had volunteered for this mission specifically because she believed in Morrison's vision of a galaxy where military strength served justice rather than oppression. Blake met with the weapons officers from both new battleships in a virtual conference, their holographic forms sitting around a digital table while they coordinated targeting solutions. She walked them through her engagement with the Crithian Patrol Squadron, explaining how she had calculated each shot to disable without destroying. The other officers listened carefully and asked technical questions, working through scenarios where 50 enemy ships would require perfect coordination between all 3 human vessels. By the end of the meeting, they had a battle plan that impressed even Blake with its elegance. The Crithian fleet departed Krytos Prime in a show of force designed to terrify anyone who witnessed it. 50 warships moving in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming crimson and gold, their weapons ports open and ready. Velthor commanded from the bridge of the Inevitable, a dreadnought so large it had its own internal docking bays. He reviewed the tactical plan one final time, satisfied that no force in the galaxy could withstand what he was about to unleash. The humans would learn that challenging the Crithian Empire meant death. Morrison gathered the coalition leadership in the Valiant's conference room and explained his strategy. The 3 human battleships would not simply fight the Crithian fleet. They would demonstrate a new way of thinking about warfare, one that prioritized precision over power and tactics over brute force. He understood the coalition had lost faith after so many defeats, but he asked them to trust humanity one more time. What they were about to witness would change everything they thought they knew about military conflict. The Crithian fleet arrived in the sector 12 hours later, dropping out of faster-than-light travel with practiced precision. Velthor's tactical display showed the 3 human ships arranged around Omega-7, exactly where his scouts had reported. He smiled at their foolishness. Dividing their forces to protect the station meant they could not concentrate their fire effectively. His fleet would overwhelm each ship in turn, starting with whichever one showed the weakest shields. He opened a general broadcast channel and delivered his ultimatum: surrender immediately or be destroyed. Morrison listened to the Admiral's demands without expression. When Velthor finished speaking, Morrison activated his own transmission and offered a counter-proposal. The Crithians could stand down, agree to negotiate new trade terms that respected all species in the sector, and avoid a battle they could not win. He spoke with complete confidence, no trace of doubt or fear in his voice. Velthor's laughter echoed across the communication channel. The Admiral called Morrison a fool and terminated the connection. The Crithian fleet began moving into attack formation. Carter activated the Intrepid's electronic warfare suite, flooding Crithian sensors with false targets and distorted readings. Murphy brought the Defiant's long-range weapons online, his targeting computers locking onto the 3 dreadnoughts first. Blake ran final checks on the Valiant's systems, her fingers steady despite knowing that in minutes they would face the largest fleet action humanity had fought since returning to galactic space. Morrison opened a channel to all 3 human ships, his voice calm and measured. Weapons free. Show them what humanity learned during 2 centuries of preparation. Show them why military superiority through oppression no longer works in this galaxy. The Crithian fleet opened fire with a barrage that turned space itself bright with deadly energy. Thousands of plasma bolts streaked toward the 3 human battleships, each one carrying enough power to vaporize a fighter craft. Missiles followed in waves, their warheads packed with antimatter that could crack asteroids. The sheer volume of fire was overwhelming, a testament to centuries of Crithian military dominance. Admiral Velthor watched from his flagship and waited for the human shields to collapse under the assault. He expected it to take perhaps 30 seconds before the enemy ships broke apart. The human defensive systems activated with machine precision. Point defense turrets tracked incoming missiles and destroyed them with laser fire so accurate that not a single warhead reached its target. Energy shields absorbed the plasma bolts, their adaptive algorithms adjusting frequencies in real time to maximize efficiency. The 3 battleships disappeared behind walls of energy as the Crithian barrage continued, sensors showing impact after impact. Coalition observers watching from Omega-7 held their breath, certain that nothing could survive such concentrated fire. Blake monitored her shield status and reported to Morrison. The Valiant's defenses were holding at 94% strength, with no sign of degradation. The Crithian attack was impressive in scale, but lacked the sophistication to challenge human technology. She noted similar reports coming from Murphy and Carter on their respective ships. The Defiant and Intrepid were also untouched, their shields absorbing everything the enemy threw at them. Blake allowed herself a small smile. The Crithians were learning an important lesson about the difference between impressive displays and effective weapons. Belthor stared at his tactical display in growing disbelief. His fleet had been firing for 2 full minutes, expending enough energy to level cities, and the human ships showed 0 damage. Their shields had not even flickered. His weapons officer reported ammunition levels dropping rapidly while achieving nothing. The admiral ordered his fleet to cease fire and regroup, needing time to analyze what was happening. His subordinates looked at him with confusion, but they followed orders and the barrage stopped. Morrison gave the order for coordinated counterattack. The 3 human battleships moved with synchronized precision, their formation shifting to optimize firing angles. Blake, Murphy, and Carter initiated their attack sequences simultaneously, 3 brilliant tactical minds working as one through shared communication systems. They did not target Crithian ships for destruction. Instead, they executed the strategy Morrison had outlined during their planning sessions: systematic disabling of enemy vessels through surgical strikes. The Valiant's railguns spoke first, solid projectiles accelerating to relativistic speeds and crossing the distance to enemy ships in heartbeats. Each round had been calculated to hit specific points on Crithian hulls, targeting weapon systems with precision that seemed impossible at such ranges. Blake watched her displays as shot after shot found its mark, Crithian plasma cannons exploding or going dark as her fire destroyed their power feeds. 10 enemy ships lost their primary weapons in the first 30 seconds. Murphy directed the Defiant's particle beams at Crithian propulsion systems, the weapons slicing through armor plating like razors through paper. He targeted engines and maneuvering thrusters, leaving enemy vessels unable to move or adjust their positions. His decades of combat experience guided every shot, his understanding of Crithian ship design allowing him to find vulnerabilities that younger officers might miss. Another 10 ships drifted helplessly as their engines died, internal fires spreading through engineering sections. Carter unleashed the Intrepid's close-range arsenal, while her electronic warfare systems played havoc with Crithian communications. Enemy ships found themselves blind and deaf, unable to coordinate responses or even see where attacks were coming from. Her weapons found their targets through the chaos, disabling sensors and communication arrays with shots that required perfect timing and positioning. The Crithian formation collapsed into disorder as ships lost contact with their flagship and with each other. 15 minutes into the engagement, 20 Crithian warships floated dead in space, completely disabled but with minimal casualties. The human attack had been so precise that most enemy crew members were uninjured, simply trapped on crippled vessels that could neither fight nor flee. Coalition observers watched in stunned silence as 3 human battleships systematically dismantled a fleet that should have been overwhelming. The tactical precision required for such an attack exceeded anything they had imagined possible. Belthor felt his confidence crumbling as report after report came in from his crippled ships. The humans were not trying to destroy his fleet. They were proving they could destroy it any time they chose. This was humiliation, a demonstration of superiority so complete that it could not be denied or explained away. He had one option remaining: the Nova cannons mounted on his 3 dreadnoughts. These weapons had never been used in actual combat, their power too devastating for any previous conflict. He gave the order to fire all 3 simultaneously at the closest human ship, the Valiant. Morrison saw the energy build up on his sensors and understood what was coming. Nova cannons drew enormous power, enough to be visible across the entire sector. He ordered his ship to maintain position and strengthen forward shields. Blake questioned whether they should evade, but Morrison refused. The coalition needed to see that humanity could withstand the Crithian's strongest weapon. If they survived this, the psychological impact would end any question about who held military superiority in this sector. The 3 Nova cannons fired as one, their combined beams creating a column of pure energy that could have vaporized a small moon. The blast hit the Valiant's forward shields and engulfed the entire battleship in light so bright that every sensor in the sector temporarily overloaded. For 3 full seconds, the Nova cannon beam poured endless power into the human ship's defenses. Coalition observers thought they had just witnessed Morrison's death. Even some of Morrison's own crew members wondered if they had pushed their technology too far. The energy dissipated, and the Valiant emerged intact. Blake checked her displays and reported shield strength at 87%. The Nova cannons had been impressive but ultimately insufficient. Every system remained functional, every crew member unharmed, the ship ready to continue fighting for hours if necessary. Morrison opened a channel to the entire Crithian fleet, his voice carrying to hundreds of enemy vessels and thousands of enemy crew members. He spoke clearly and without anger. Humanity did not want war, did not seek conquest or dominance, but they would not tolerate oppression and would not allow the strong to prey on the weak. He offered Admiral Velthor one final chance to stand down, to begin genuine negotiations for a peace that respected all species. The alternative was watching his entire fleet disabled and towed home in shame, his military career ended, his empire's reputation shattered. The choice belonged to Velthor, but he had 30 seconds to make it. Velthor sat in his command chair and felt the weight of his decision. Pride demanded he continue fighting, that he spend every ship and every life to prove Crithian superiority, but tactical sense showed him the truth his pride refused to accept. He could not win this battle. The humans had demonstrated technology and capability that his empire would need decades to match. Continuing the fight would only result in more disabled ships and eventually his own capture. He gave the hardest order of his military career: cease fire and hold position. The battle stopped. 3 months passed between the battle and the peace conference. 3 months during which the galaxy struggled to understand what had happened near Omega-7. Word spread through trade routes and communication networks about how 3 human battleships had defeated 50 Crithian warships without destroying a single vessel. Some species celebrated the news, seeing hope for their own freedom. Others worried about what humanity would do with such overwhelming power. Everyone wanted to know whether the humans would repeat the Crithian pattern of dominance through military might. Ambassador Zixra stood in the main hall of Concord Ring, a neutral station that had hosted peace negotiations for centuries. The circular chamber could accommodate representatives from 100 species, its walls decorated with symbols of every civilization that had ever signed a treaty here. Today, the hall held delegations from the Crithian Empire, the Resistance Coalition, and humanity. Zixra had spent weeks helping organize this conference, working to ensure every voice would be heard and every concern addressed. Admiral Velthor sat across from Commander Morrison in a smaller conference room, the 2 military leaders beginning preliminary discussions before the formal negotiations started. The admiral looked different from the proud warrior who had commanded the fleet at Omega-7. His uniform remained immaculate, his bearing still dignified, but something fundamental had changed. He had been stripped of his fleet command and assigned to diplomatic duties, a demotion that would have destroyed most Crithian officers. Instead, Velthor seemed almost relieved to be talking rather than fighting. Morrison explained humanity's philosophy during their 2 centuries away from galactic politics. They had witnessed too much warfare during first contact, too many species using military advantage to exploit weaker neighbors. Humanity decided that if they wanted freedom, they needed power to defend that freedom. But power without purpose became tyranny, so they also developed principles about when and how to use force. The goal was never domination but deterrence, making aggression too costly for any potential enemy while remaining open to peaceful cooperation with everyone else. Velthor listened carefully and asked questions that showed his tactical mind remained sharp despite his defeat. He admitted that he had underestimated humanity, assuming technological advantage would always favor the Crithians. 2 centuries seemed too short a time for any species to advance so dramatically. Morrison explained that necessity accelerated innovation, that humanity had poured enormous resources into military research specifically because they refused to accept permanent inferiority. The result was technology that surpassed current galactic standards. But humanity had no interest in keeping that advantage forever. The formal peace negotiations began with opening statements from each major delegation. The Crithian representative, a diplomat named Kilrath, acknowledged that the Empire's policies had created legitimate grievances among other species. Trade restrictions had been too harsh, Military responses too quick. Respect for other cultures too limited. The Empire was prepared to make changes, but they needed assurance that these changes would not leave them vulnerable to attacks from those they had previously dominated. Morrison delivered humanity's statement, explaining that Earth wanted to see a galaxy where all species could trade freely, develop peacefully, and resolve disputes through negotiation rather than warfare. Humanity would guarantee the security of any species that agreed to these principles, using their military power to deter aggression from any source. But this guarantee came with conditions. No territorial expansion through force, no trade monopolies, no using military strength to coerce weaker neighbors. Species that violated these principles would face human intervention. The coalition delegates presented their demands: reparations for damage caused by Crethian military actions, removal of all trade restrictions, and formal recognition of their sovereignty. They also requested access to human defensive technology, arguing that they deserved the ability to protect themselves without relying entirely on human goodwill. This last point created tension in the negotiations, as humanity remained reluctant to share their most advanced systems with anyone. Blake worked with coalition military leaders to establish the Galactic Defense Academy, a training facility where officers from multiple species would learn human tactical doctrine. The academy would not teach technology but strategy, showing other species how to use what they already possessed more effectively. Blake found herself enjoying the teaching role, discovering that sharing knowledge brought its own satisfaction. The first class of students arrived eager to learn from the humans who had revolutionized modern warfare. Carter focused on diplomatic efforts, using her electronic warfare expertise to help establish secure communication networks that would support the new peace framework. She worked closely with representatives from species that had previously been enemies, helping them build trust through shared systems and transparent protocols. Her calm demeanor and technical brilliance won respect, even from Crethians who still struggled to accept their defeat. Murphy coordinated with the Defiance crew to patrol the sector, ensuring no rogue elements tried to disrupt the peace process. His long-range sensors monitored for any military buildups or unauthorized fleet movements. The presence of human battleships provided stability during the delicate negotiation period, their mere existence discouraging anyone who might consider violence as an alternative to compromise. The final treaty took 6 weeks to draft and required input from dozens of species. It established free trade zones where any civilization could conduct commerce without excessive tariffs or restrictions. It created mutual defense pacts where attacks on one signatory would trigger response from all others. It prohibited territorial expansion through military force while allowing peaceful colonization of unclaimed systems. Most importantly, it included enforcement mechanisms that gave humanity the authority to intervene when violations occurred. Zixra addressed the Galactic Assembly on the day the treaty was signed, reflecting on how quickly everything had changed. 3 months earlier, the coalition had been facing extinction at Crethian hands. Now they stood as equals in a new galactic order, protected by human military might but free to chart their own course. She credited Morrison and his crew with not just saving the coalition but fundamentally changing how power functioned in their region of space. Morrison received new orders from Earth Command, transmitted through quantum communication. The Vale Nebula sector had achieved stable peace and other regions needed human presence. The Valiant would depart Concord Ring within the week, heading toward unexplored space beyond the current galactic boundaries. Earth wanted to know what lay in those distant stars, and they trusted Morrison to find out while upholding the principles that had guided humanity's return to galactic affairs. Blake stood beside Morrison on the Valiant's bridge as they prepared for departure. Ships from a dozen species had gathered to escort them to the edge of known space, a gesture of respect and friendship that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Former enemies now flew in formation with human battleships, their crews communicating freely and coordinating maneuvers. Blake remarked that they had accomplished something remarkable here, changing hearts and minds as much as tactical situations. Morrison watched the starfields on his viewport and thought about what awaited them beyond mapped space. New civilizations, new challenges, possibly new threats that would test humanity's commitment to their principles. But whatever they found, they would face it the same way they had faced the Crethian Empire, with courage, innovation, and unwavering dedication to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The fleet jumped to quantum speed, leaving Concord Ring behind. Morrison's final message broadcast across all civilized channels in the sector, a warning to any who would threaten the innocent. A human battleship might arrive anywhere at any time, and when it did, battles would never be the same. Not because humans sought war, but because they had proven that true strength came from defending others and that lasting peace required both the power to fight and the wisdom to choose peace whenever possible.